Disclaimer: this program contains graphic descriptions of real crimes. Viewer discretion is advised. All parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty in court. He spent 18 years believing he was a father. On his 18 birthdays, on Christmas mornings of his 18 years of sacrifice and unconditional love, Michael worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and poured everything he had into raising his son, Jacob. To him, fatherhood was the greatest role of his life, but on Jacob's 18th birthday the truth surfaced, a truth no father should ever hear. The boy he had raised, his pride and joy, wasn't his son at all. He was his brother's. This is the story of how love, betrayal, and bloodlines collided, and how one family was destroyed by a secret that refused to stay buried. Michael grew up in a quiet town where family meant everything. He wasn't flashy, not the type to chase wild adventures. He was steady, reliable, the kind of man people trusted. When he met Sarah, it felt like fate. She was vibrant, charming, and ambitious. They were complete opposites, but Michael believed that's why it worked. When Sarah became pregnant a year into their relationship, Michael didn't hesitate. He proposed immediately. He wanted to give his child the family he himself had been raised with. The night Jacob was born, Michael cried in the delivery room. He held the tiny baby in his arms and whispered promises he intended to keep forever. From that moment on, his life revolved around being a father. The years rolled by, and Michael settled into family life. He worked long hours to provide for Sarah and Jacob. He never complained, but whispers crept in. Friends teased him that Jacob looked a lot like Uncle Daniel, his younger brother. Daniel was everything Michael wasn't. Wild, reckless, charming, he lived fast, with no thought of tomorrow. At family gatherings, people joked about how Jacob had Daniel's smile, his eyes, his mannerisms. Michael laughed along, but deep inside, something stung. He brushed it off. Genetics were unpredictable, and besides, he trusted Sarah. But sometimes, late at night, he caught the way Sarah looked at Daniel, a lingering glance, a smile that wasn't meant for a brother-in-law. Michael wanted to ignore it. He had to, because the alternative was too painful to imagine. Daniel had always been close to Jacob. Too close, maybe. He took Jacob fishing. He showed him how to drive. He was there for conversations Michael hadn't been ready to have. Michael told himself it was a good thing. Jacob had more love, more support. But every time Daniel stepped in, Michael felt like a shadow in his own son's life. Still, he never questioned the bond. Jacob adored Daniel, and Michael loved seeing Jacob happy, until the birthday that changed everything. On Jacob's 18th birthday, Michael wanted to give him something meaningful. A DNA ancestry kit, just for fun, a way to trace their roots, explore family history. He never imagined it would destroy everything. Weeks later, Jacob called him, voice trembling, "Dad, my results don't make sense." Michael laughed nervously. "What do you mean? They say we're not a match. You're not my biological father." The words froze him. He rushed to check the account himself. The screen confirmed the nightmare. Jacob's closest paternal relative wasn't Michael. It was Daniel. Michael confronted Sarah that night. He walked into the living room, test results shaking in his hands. "Tell me the truth. Is Jacob my brother's son?" Sarah crumbled. She admitted to a single night with Daniel, just weeks before she learned she was pregnant. She claimed she didn't know who the father was. When Michael proposed, she chose stability. "You were the better man." She sobbed. "I thought it wouldn't matter. I thought love would be enough." But to Michael, it wasn't enough. 18 years of lies couldn't be undone with an apology. He stormed to Daniel's apartment. The moment Daniel opened the door, Michael lunged at him. Neighbors had to drag them apart as years of betrayal boiled over. Daniel didn't deny it. He shrugged. I didn't know for sure either. You raised him, not me." The words cut deeper than fists ever could. The revelation spread quickly. In a small town, secrets didn't stay secret for long. Michael's marriage disintegrated. Sarah filed for divorce. The gossip was relentless. Friends whispered. Strangers pitied him. But the deepest wound came from Jacob himself. Caught between two men, Jacob lashed out. "You're not even my dad," he shouted during one heated argument. Later, he turned his anger on Daniel. "Why weren't you there?" Jacob's world collapsed alongside Michael's. His very identity, who he was, who he belonged to, was thrown into question. As the divorce played out, Daniel shocked everyone by filing for legal paternity rights. "I'm his real father," he told the court. "He deserves to know the truth." The case tore the family even further apart. Jacob was forced to testify, to choose. In a hushed courtroom, the teenager stood tall and declared, "Michael is my father. Daniel is just my biological donor." The words brought tears to Michael's eyes. But the victory was hollow. The scars remained. Michael won custody, but rebuilding was hard. Jacob battled anger, confusion, and mistrust. Therapy helped, but the wound never fully healed. Still, Michael refused to give up. He showed up at every game, every milestone. He wanted Jacob to see that love was stronger than DNA. Years later, Jacob would look back and say, "Blood doesn't make a father, choice does, and Michael chose me every day of my life." This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about what truly defines family. Michael lost his wife. He lost his brother. He even lost the certainty of who his son was. But he never lost the bond he built, because fatherhood isn't biology. It's sacrifice, loyalty, and love. And sometimes the family we raise is stronger than the family we're born into. Michael believed his life was simple: work, home, family. He wore his responsibilities like armor, steady, dependable, never wavering. But underneath that armor, small cracks had begun to form. It started with the jokes, friends at family gatherings nudging him with knowing smiles. "Funny how Jacob has Daniel's grin, huh?" Michael laughed along. He had to question it would mean questioning everything, and questioning meant risking the life he had built. But Sarah's reactions were different. Whenever someone mentioned the resemblance, she went stiff, her smile fading. She quickly changed the subject. Michael noticed, he always noticed, Daniel, his younger brother, was magnetic. Where Michael was quiet, Daniel was loud. Where Michael worked long hours, Daniel chased thrills. He was the kind of man people gravitated toward, even when they shouldn't, and Jacob adored him. At 5 years old, Jacob wanted to dress like Uncle Daniel. At 10, he wanted Daniel to come to his soccer games. By 16, he was calling Daniel for advice Michael didn't even know he needed. To everyone else, it looked sweet, an uncle who cared, but to Michael, it stung. Each bond they shared felt like something stolen from him. One night, Michael walked into the kitchen to find Sarah and Daniel talking in low voices. They snapped upright the moment he entered, guilt flashing across their faces. "What's going on?" Michael asked. "Nothing," Sarah said quickly, too quickly, "just talking about Jacob's school stuff." Daniel smirked, brushing it off. "Relax, big brother. You worked too hard. We were just catching up." Michael wanted to believe them. He told himself he was imagining things, but deep down, a seed of suspicion had been planted. Michael convinced himself it was paranoia. After all, he had everything he ever wanted: a wife, a son, a family. Why risk tearing it apart over shadows and whispers? So he buried his doubts. He worked harder, tried to be a better husband, a better father. But late at night, when Sarah thought he was asleep, Michael sometimes caught her staring at Jacob with an expression he couldn't quite read. Was it love or was it guilt? He didn't know, and he was too afraid to ask. For 18 years, Michael clung to the belief that his family was whole. But the truth was already there, hiding in plain sight, in the glances, the jokes, the silence. And on Jacob's 18th birthday, the truth would finally explode. Jacob's 18th birthday should have been a celebration, a milestone, the moment Michael could finally look back on all the years of sacrifice and say, "I did it. I raised a good man, but fate had other plans." Michael wanted something meaningful for his son, not just money, not just a party, but a gift that would connect Jacob to his roots. A DNA ancestry kit seemed harmless, even fun. "Think of it," Michael said with a proud smile. "You'll learn about where we come from, our family history. You'll always carry this with you." Jacob grinned, excited. Neither of them knew that little box would carry the power to destroy everything. Weeks later, the email arrived. Jacob opened it first. His excitement faded into confusion, then dread. He called his father, voice trembling, "Dad, these results don't make sense." Michael laughed at first, trying to ease the tension. "What do you mean? It's just a test." But Jacob's voice broke. It says, "You're not my biological father." Michael froze. His heart pounded. He rushed to check the account himself, staring at the cold numbers, the percentages, the matches. There it was, in black and white. No paternal connection. Instead, the test pointed to a different match, a closer paternal link. Daniel, his younger brother. Michael's knees buckled. His mind raced back over the years. The jokes, the glances, the whispers, Sarah's uneasy smiles. Pieces of a puzzle he had refused to put together now slammed into place. 18 years of memories, teaching Jacob to ride a bike, cheering him on at soccer games, staying up late with him during fevers, were suddenly tainted by doubt. The boy he raised, the son he loved, wasn't his. For Jacob, the revelation was just as crushing. "Everything I thought I knew, it's a lie," he whispered. He stared at Michael with wide, uncertain eyes. "If you're not my dad, then who am I?" Michael wanted to reach for him, to reassure him, to say none of it mattered. But the words caught in his throat. The betrayal was too fresh, and deep down, a darker question gnawed at him. Had Sarah known all along? The test was supposed to be a gift. Instead, it ripped open a secret that had lived in the shadows for nearly 2 decades, and now Michael needed answers, answers only Sarah and his brother could give. Michael paced the living room, the DNA results clutched in his trembling hand. His chest tightened with every breath. 18 years of trust, of marriage, of sacrifice, reduced to numbers on a screen. When Sarah walked in, he didn't waste time. His voice was raw, sharp, and trembling. "Tell me the truth, Sarah. Is Jacob my brother's son?" At first, Sarah tried to deflect. "Michael, you're overreacting. These tests aren't always right. Don't lie to me." His roar cut through the room like glass shattering. He slammed the papers down on the table. "This test doesn't lie. Did you sleep with Daniel?" Her face drained of color. She covered her mouth as if the truth was spilling out against her will. Tears filled her eyes, and then, finally, she broke. "Yes." The word hit Michael harder than any blow. His world tilted. "It was one night." She whispered, "Just one mistake, years ago. I didn't even know I was pregnant until later. When you proposed, I chose you. I chose stability. I chose love." Michael staggered back, shaking his head. "Love? You call this love? You've lied to me for 18 years. Sarah sobbed. "I thought it wouldn't matter. I thought Jacob was yours, and when the years passed, I convinced myself it was better this way. You were the better man, the better father. Daniel could never have given Jacob what you gave him." But her words didn't heal. They cut deeper. Michael's hands balled into fists. His voice cracked under the weight of betrayal. "You robbed me of the truth. You robbed him of the truth, and all this time my own brother knew." Sarah shook her head frantically. "No, Daniel didn't know for sure. He thought it was a mistake, nothing more. I never told him the timing, but Michael wasn't listening anymore. The blood roared in his ears. The pieces of the puzzle had become unbearable. Every smile between Sarah and Daniel, every whispered joke, every resemblance people pointed out. It wasn't paranoia. It was betrayal. Michael slammed his fist against the wall, his voice trembling with rage. "You've destroyed this family. You've destroyed me." Sarah collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to fix it once it started. Please believe me." But Michael didn't believe her. Not anymore. He grabbed the DNA papers from the table, his jaw tight with fury. If Daniel didn't know, he's about to. And with that, Michael stormed out of the house, ready to confront the brother who had betrayed him in the most unforgivable way. The truth was finally out, but for Michael, the revelation wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a war. Next stop, his brother's door. Michael's fists clenched around the DNA results as he stormed up the stairwell to Daniel's apartment. Every step echoed like a drumbeat of rage. For 18 years, he had carried the weight of fatherhood, while his brother carried nothing but secrets. When the door swung open, Daniel's smug grin was the last straw. Michael shoved the papers into his brother's chest. "Explain this." Now, Daniel glanced down, his eyes scanning the results. For a moment, the cocky charm slipped. Then, just as quickly, it returned. "So, it's true." Michael's voice shook with fury. "You knew. All these years you knew." Daniel lifted his hands in mock surrender. "I didn't know. Sarah never said anything. I thought it was just a fling, a mistake. You were the one who stepped up, not me." Those words sent Michael over the edge. He lunged, slamming Daniel against the wall. Neighbors later said they heard the crash, the shouts, the sound of fists meeting flesh. "You stole my family," Michael roared. "My son, my life." Daniel shoved him back, eyes flashing. "Your life. You think Jacob would have wanted a father like you. I gave him the parts you couldn't. I gave him freedom, fun. He looks up to me more than he ever looked up to you." The words cut deeper than any punch. Michael staggered back, breathing hard, his knuckles bloody, rage mixed with heartbreak. "You've poisoned everything, Daniel, you and Sarah both, and now Jacob has to live with this mess because of you." For once, Daniel didn't have a comeback. His smirk faded. He looked away, guilt flashing across his face. But only for a second. "I'm still his father," Daniel muttered, "and he deserves to know the truth." Michael's jaw tightened. "No, you don't get to claim him. You weren't there for the sleepless nights, the school plays, the hospital trips. I was. You don't get to walk in now and play dad because of biology. The fight ended only when neighbors dragged them apart." Michael stormed off, his body aching, his soul shattered. Daniel stood in the doorway, chest heaving, eyes dark with something dangerous. A challenge that wasn't over. And for the first time, Michael realized this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about a war for Jacob. The rivalry between brothers, once hidden in whispers and glances, was now wide open, raw, and explosive. And as the dust settled, one question remained. Whose son was Jacob really going to be? The fight between Michael and Daniel didn't just scar the brothers. It shattered Jacob's world. For 18 years he had lived under the illusion of certainty. One father, one family, one identity. Now all of that was gone. Jacob sat in his room, the DNA results spread across his desk like broken glass. His hands shook as he stared at the percentages, the matches, the undeniable truth. Michael, his dad, the man who raised him, wasn't his biological father. Daniel, his uncle, his role model, his fun escape was, he whispered to himself over and over, Who am I supposed to be now? Michael tried to reach him first. His voice cracked with desperation. Jacob, listen to me. I don't care what that test says. I'm your father. I've always been your father. Nothing changes that. But Jacob's eyes were cold, uncertain. How am I supposed to believe that when everyone's been lying to me? Later, Daniel cornered him. He leaned in, voice low, persuasive. They kept the truth from you, Jacob, but I'm not going to. You deserve to know where you come from. You deserve to know who you really are. The words poisoned Jacob's thoughts. Two men, both claiming him, both pulling him in different directions. At school, Jacob couldn't escape the whispers. Classmates who'd overheard their parents' gossip. Teachers with pity in their eyes. Friends who joked cruelly, "Hey, man, which dad's picking you up today?" He exploded one afternoon, shoving his best friend into a locker, screaming until teachers dragged him away. At home, he shut his bedroom door, refusing to speak to either man. The silence grew heavy, suffocating, until one night he burst out of his room, his voice breaking under the weight of his pain. "Stop fighting over me. I'm not a prize to be won. I didn't ask for any of this." Weeks later, the conflict landed in court. Daniel had filed for legal recognition as Jacob's father. Michael, desperate not to lose the boy he raised, fought back. Jacob sat in the courtroom, trembling as the judge asked him the unthinkable, "Who do you want to live with?" The room was silent. Sarah sobbed in the corner. Michael's hands were clenched, praying. Daniel leaned forward, his smirk barely hidden. Jacob swallowed hard, his voice cracked. "Michael is my father. Daniel is just my biological donor." The words rang out like a gavel strike. Michael wept with relief. Daniel's smirk vanished, but even as the judge ruled, Jacob knew the scars would never fade, because choosing one father meant losing the other, and nothing could ever make him whole again. The gavel had fallen. The judge's decision was final. Michael was Jacob's legal father, but when they walked out of that courtroom, there was no victory, only silence. Jacob stared at himself in the bathroom mirror, studying his own features like they belonged to someone else. His jawline, his eyes, his smile, none of it felt familiar anymore. Was he Michael's son, or Daniel's? Was he both, or neither? Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw two men staring back at him, one who had raised him with love, and one whose blood ran in his veins. He whispered into the silence, "I don't even know who I am anymore." In their small town, gossip spread faster than fire. People whispered in grocery store aisle. At church, heads turned when Michael and Jacob walked in. "That's the boy whose father is his uncle." Someone muttered, "Can you imagine raising a child for 18 years only to find out he wasn't yours?" Another whispered. Jacob heard it all, and the weight of their words crushed him more than the truth itself. Michael tried to shield Jacob, tried to drown out the noise with love. He drove him to school every morning, stayed for his basketball games, cheered louder than anyone else. But when he saw Jacob's hunched shoulders, the way his son avoided eye contact with classmates, he knew. No amount of cheering could erase the sting of being the boy with two fathers. At night, Michael prayed Jacob wouldn't hate him for fighting so hard to keep him, when keeping him also meant keeping the pain alive. And Daniel, he didn't disappear. He lurked at the edges, making quiet appearances at Jacob's school events, trying to insert himself into his life, always with the same refrain, "I'm your real father. They can't hide that from you." Each word twisted the knife deeper. The courtroom had ended the legal battle, but it hadn't ended the war inside Jacob's heart, or the whispers outside his door. Because in a town that thrived on gossip, the truth wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a scar they'd never escape. The court had chosen Michael, but Daniel wasn't done. To him, the gavel didn't end the fight. It only lit a new fire. He started showing up everywhere Jacob went, at basketball practice leaning against the fence, at the diner Jacob worked weekends slipping him money with a wink, at school events cheering louder than anyone else, just to remind Michael he wasn't going away. "I'm your real father," Daniel would whisper when no one was watching. "You've got my blood. Don't ever forget that." For Jacob, the words were poison. They echoed in his mind, louder with each day. Michael noticed the shift. Jacob grew distant, snapping at him, retreating to his room, avoiding conversations. One night, Michael finally asked, his voice breaking, "Son, are you pulling away from me? Do you believe him?" Jacob exploded. "I don't know what to believe. He's my biological father. You're the man who raised me. I'm stuck in the middle, and I'm drowning." Michael's chest caved at the words. He reached out, but Jacob pulled away. The gossip, the courtroom, the constant tug-of-war, it all came crashing down one night. Jacob stormed out of the house, fists clenched, eyes blazing. He ran straight to Daniel's apartment, demanding answers. "Why are you doing this to me? Why can't you leave me alone?" Jacob shouted. Daniel smiled, calm and cruel. "Because you're mine, Jacob, you always were. And sooner or later, you'll see I can give you the life he never could." Jacob's breathing turned ragged. His mind swirled. He wanted to scream, to cry, to disappear. When Jacob stumbled home hours later, Michael was waiting. His son collapsed into his arms, shaking, sobbing, whispering words Michael would never forget. "I don't want to choose anymore. I just want to be me, but they won't let me. They're tearing me apart." Michael held him tighter, tears streaming down his own face. He realized then, it wasn't just his war with Daniel. It was Jacob's war with himself. The truth had already destroyed Michael's marriage. It had destroyed his brotherhood, and now it was threatening to destroy the one bond he had left, his son. The war between Michael and Daniel had pushed Jacob to his breaking point. For weeks he had been pulled apart. One man demanding loyalty for the years of love he gave, the other claiming him by blood. But the pressure was unbearable, and Jacob knew he couldn't live in limbo any longer. One evening, after another screaming match between Michael and Daniel spilled into the street, Jacob stormed out of the house. His voice shook with anger, but his words were ice. "I'm done. I can't be in the middle anymore. If you two want to keep fighting, fine, but I won't be part of it." Michael reached for him. "Son, don't say that. I'm not your son." Jacob snapped, his eyes wet. "Not the way you want me to be, not anymore." The words hit Michael like a knife. Jacob packed a bag and made a choice neither man expected. He left both homes. He didn't go to Michael. He didn't go to Daniel. He moved in with a friend's family, determined to carve out a life away from the chaos. "If I stay with either of you," Jacob said in a letter he left behind, "I'll never know who I really am, so I'm choosing myself." Michael sat at the kitchen table, the letter crumpled in his hand, tears streaming down his face. For the first time, he realized he might lose the boy he had raised, not to his brother, but to the storm they had created. Daniel, too, was shaken. For all his arrogance, he hadn't expected Jacob to walk away completely. His smirk was gone, replaced by a haunted look. They had both fought to claim him, and in the end, they had both driven him away. Jacob's drastic choice sent shockwaves through the family. He wasn't Michael's. He wasn't Daniel's. For the first time in his life, Jacob belonged only to himself. But the question lingered, could either brother accept a world where Jacob wanted neither of them? Living under someone else's roof gave Jacob the distance he desperately needed. For the first time in months, he wasn't hearing Michael and Daniel scream at each other. He wasn't being pulled into courtrooms or cornered in hallways. He was just Jacob. He got a job stocking shelves at a local store. He signed up for night classes, determined to prove to himself, if not to anyone else, that his future wouldn't be defined by a DNA test. Each paycheck, each small achievement, felt like a step toward freedom. But even as he built a new life, the scars remained. Back at home, Michael stared at Jacob's empty bedroom. The posters still hung on the wall. The bed was still unmade, but the boy who had filled the room with laughter was gone. For 18 years, Michael's identity had been father. Every decision, every sacrifice, every dream was tied to Jacob. Now the silence echoed louder than any words. He had fought to keep his son, and yet he had lost him anyway. Daniel told himself he had won. Jacob was gone from Michael's home. He wasn't just the nephew anymore. But the victory rang hollow. Jacob hadn't chosen him either. He had chosen no one. For all his arrogance, Daniel couldn't escape the truth. His selfishness, his recklessness, had destroyed the very bond he wanted. He was left standing alone, watching the son he never raised slip further from reach. For Jacob, the road was hard, but it was his. He joined a local basketball league, not because Michael or Daniel pushed him, but because he wanted to play. He stopped introducing himself as Michael's son or Daniel's nephew. He was simply Jacob, and for the first time he felt a flicker of peace. The DNA test had stolen his childhood. The war between brothers had stolen his home. But Jacob was determined that neither would steal his future. And as Michael and Daniel sat in their separate silences, one mourning what he'd lost, the other realizing what he'd thrown away, Jacob began writing a new story. One that belonged only to him. Years passed, but in their small town the scandal never truly faded. People whispered about it in hushed tones, even after Jacob had moved out and built his own life. That's the boy whose father turned out to be his uncle. That poor man raising a child for 18 years only to find out it wasn't his. The gossip became legend, something mothers warned daughters about, something men joked about when they thought Michael couldn't hear. To strangers it was a story. To the family it was a wound that never fully healed. Michael grew older with the silence of an empty house. He poured himself into work, into church, into anything that would keep him busy. But every night he found himself staring at a single photograph. Him and Jacob at a little league game, smiles wide, the world still intact. He replayed it all in his mind, the birthdays, the late night talks, the sacrifices, and wondered if he could have done more to hold on. He regretted the rage, the fists, the shouting. He regretted letting the truth harden him instead of holding Jacob closer. His greatest fear wasn't losing his wife or his brother. It was that Jacob would never forgive him. Daniel, for all his bravado, had burned too many bridges. His relationships were fleeting, his promises empty, and every time he looked in the mirror, he saw Jacob's face staring back at him, not in pride, but in accusation. He had wanted recognition as Jacob's father, but what he got was rejection. And now, in his loneliness, Daniel realized the truth. Biology might make a man a father, but it could never make him dad. Jacob grew into adulthood, carrying the weight of his past, but refusing to let it define him. He went to college, found steady work, even began mentoring younger kids, children who needed guidance the way he once had. But even as he built something better, the question lingered, should he let either man back into his life? On his 25th birthday, Jacob made a decision. He invited both Michael and Daniel to dinner. For the first time in years, they sat across the same table, the tension thick, the silence heavier than words. Jacob raised his glass, his voice steady. "You're both part of me, but I refuse to be broken between you anymore. I'm not choosing sides. If you want to be in my life, you'll have to find a way to sit at the same table, for my sake, not yours." Michael's eyes welled with tears. Daniel bowed his head, shame flickering across his face. For the first time, the war wasn't about who Jacob belonged to. It was about whether they could belong in his world at all. The scandal had scarred them. The town had branded them. The years had aged them, but at that table Jacob finally reclaimed his power, not as Michael's son, not as Daniel's, but as his own man. The table Jacob set was simple, no grand feast, no speeches. Just a chance for the three of them to sit in the same room without shouting, without fists, without courtrooms. But silence hung heavy, thicker than smoke. Michael kept his hands folded, eyes fixed on his plate. Daniel tapped his fingers nervously, his usual arrogance stripped away. Jacob broke the silence. "I'm not asking you to like each other. I'm asking you to stop making me choose." Michael swallowed hard. "Jacob, I've never stopped loving you. I don't know if I can sit across from him without remembering what he took from me." His voice cracked as he looked at Daniel. "You stole my family, my wife, my years. How am I supposed to forgive that?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I never set out to take anything from you, Sarah and I. It was a mistake, but you can't deny the truth." "He is my son." Michael slammed his hand on the table. "He's my son. I raised him. You don't get to claim him after 18 years of silence." The air thickened, their voices rising, old wounds flaring open. Jacob's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, eyes blazing. "Enough!" he shouted. Both men froze. "I didn't bring you here to relive the past. I brought you here because I'm tired of being torn apart. I'm not the boy in the middle anymore. I'm a man. If either of you wants to stay in my life, you'll do it on my terms." Not through guilt, not through blood, but through respect. The authority in his voice silenced the room. For a long moment no one spoke. Then, slowly, Michael nodded. His eyes filled with tears, but his voice was steady. "You're right, son." "I'll follow your lead, always." Daniel hesitated, his pride fighting against the truth. But at last he exhaled, shoulders sagging. "If this is what it takes to be part of your life." "I'll try." It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't healing, but it was a start. The dinner ended not with hugs, not with reconciliation, but with a fragile truce. For Jacob it was enough, for now, because peace didn't come from choosing sides. It came from forcing both men to face the same truth. He wasn't theirs to claim. For a brief moment Jacob thought the worst was behind them. The dinner had ended without fists or screaming, and for the first time both men seemed willing to step back. But in their small town, peace was fragile. At the grocery store, Jacob overheard two women near the fruit aisle. "That's him, the boy who grew up thinking his uncle was his father. Can you imagine the shame?" At the gas station, laughter followed him as someone muttered, "Which dad's picking him up today?" Even years later, the story hadn't died. It had become folklore, told, exaggerated, and weaponized. Michael did his best to protect Jacob from the whispers, but he heard them too. Every sideways glance was a reminder of the life he'd lost, the respect stripped away. He tried to reassure Jacob. "Son, people talk. Let them. They don't know us." But Jacob shook his head. "That's the problem. They do know us. They know everything." And Michael had no answer. Daniel, meanwhile, brushed it off with bravado. "Let them talk. Who cares what they think? We're family. That's all that matters." But Jacob wasn't fooled. He saw how Daniel's eyes darted at the whispers, how his shoulders stiffened at the stares. Pride was a mask Daniel wore, but behind it the shame cut deep. The fragile peace was cracking. Every outing felt like a battlefield of gossip. Every whisper reopened the wound. One night, Jacob sat alone, staring at the lights of the town he had called home his entire life. His voice broke as he whispered to himself, "If I stay here, I'll never be Jacob. I'll always be the boy in the story." Weeks later, he made his choice. Jacob packed his bags again, this time not to escape Michael or Daniel, but to escape the town itself. He sat both men down. His voice was steady, though his eyes were heavy. "I love you both, but I can't stay here anymore. This place will never let me grow beyond what happened. If you want to be part of my future, you'll visit me where I build my life, but I can't keep living inside this story." Michael wept silently, nodding. understanding the pain of letting go. Daniel clenched his jaw, but even he didn't argue. The town had chained Jacob to a story of betrayal and blood, but he refused to let whispers define his future. For the first time, his next chapter wasn't about choosing between Michael and Daniel. It was about choosing himself. The city was louder, faster, and anonymous, exactly what Jacob needed. Here, no one pointed, no one whispered, no one knew his past. He could be just Jacob, not the boy in the scandal. He rented a small apartment, took a steady job at a tech firm, and enrolled in night classes. Every corner of the city reminded him of freedom, of possibility. For the first time in years, he breathed without the weight of judgment. But silence doesn't erase scars. Some nights, Jacob lay awake replaying old arguments in his head. Michael's trembling voice, "I'm your father," Daniel's smug claim, "You're mine," Sarah's sobs, confessing the truth. The city's noise couldn't drown those voices. They followed him like shadows, whispering that no matter how far he ran, the story lived inside him. Back home, Michael wrote him letters, pages filled with updates about the old house, about the church, about how proud he was of Jacob's new life. "Not a day goes by that I don't miss you," one letter read, "but I'm glad you're finding your own path. Just know, I'll always be here if you need me." Jacob kept the letters in a drawer, unopened at first. But on lonely nights he read them, and sometimes he cried. Daniel, on the other hand, reached out only once. A short text, "I'm still your father. That doesn't change, no matter where you go." Jacob stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without replying. Over time, Jacob built a circle of friends who knew nothing of his past. He played basketball in a local league, laughed at weekend cookouts, even started dating someone who saw him not as Michael's son or Daniel's son, but simply as Jacob. And yet, when the truth weighed on him, he wondered, should I tell them? Should I let them see the scars? Or should I keep the story buried forever? The city gave Jacob freedom, but freedom couldn't erase the past. Because the question wasn't just whether he could escape the whispers, it was whether he could ever escape himself. In the city, Jacob had finally carved out something that felt like peace. Work, friends, late-night basketball games. His life was ordinary, steady, and finally his own. He thought distance had solved everything, that miles could bury wounds, that time could erase whispers, but healing wasn't that simple. One rainy evening, Jacob heard a knock. When he opened the door, his heart nearly stopped. Michael stood there, soaked, older than Jacob remembered, with tired eyes that carried both love and regret. "I didn't come to drag you back," Michael said softly. "I just wanted to see you, to see the man you've become." Jacob let him in reluctantly. The apartment suddenly felt too small. His new life colliding with the man who had raised him, the man he had run from, the man who was both everything and nothing to him. They sat across from each other in silence, the hum of the city outside filling the gaps words couldn't. Finally, Michael broke it. "I read your letters. I know you needed space, but Jacob, distance doesn't erase love. I'll always be your father, whether you let me or not." Jacob swallowed hard, his chest tight. "But love doesn't erase scars either, Dad. Every time I look at you, I see the life that broke me." The word "Dad" slipped out before Jacob could stop it, and Michael's eyes filled with tears. Michael leaned forward, his voice trembling. "Then tell me, what do I have to do to be part of your life again? Not as the man who raised you, not as the man who lost you, but as the man who still loves you." Jacob's heart ached. For years he had wondered if running was the only answer, but now, face to face, he realized distance couldn't keep the past away. The question wasn't whether he could escape, it was whether he could forgive. The rain tapped against them. window as Michael sat across from Jacob, his clothes damp, his eyes heavy with years of regret. Jacob shifted uncomfortably, his heart pounding. This was the man who had raised him, the man who had taught him how to ride a bike, how to shave, how to face the world. But he was also the man tied. The secret that had destroyed his childhood, the silence between them was louder than any argument they had ever had. Jacob spoke first, his voice low, trembling. "Everywhere I go, Dad, I carry it with me. The whispers, the lies, the truth, it doesn't go away. It's like a shadow that follows me into every room." Michael swallowed hard. "I know, and I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. All I can do now is be here, if you'll let me." Jacob's hands clenched. Forgiveness sounded simple when spoken aloud, but living with it was another story. Could he really let Michael close again? Wouldn't that mean reopening every wound? Michael leaned forward, his voice breaking. "I don't need to be perfect. I don't need to be right. I just want to be in your life, Jacob, even if it's just a small corner of it. Please." Jacob felt the pull of those words. He remembered the nights Michael stayed up during his fevers, the way he cheered louder than anyone else at games, the sacrifices he never once bragged about. The love was real, the betrayal was real too, and Jacob stood in the middle, torn. Finally, Jacob whispered, "If I let you in, I need boundaries. I need to build my life without you trying to control it. I need to be Jacob. Not just your son, not just Daniel's mistake, not the town's gossip. Me." Michael's eyes filled with tears. He nodded slowly. "Then that's who I'll love you. No matter what." Jacob's chest tightened. Forgiveness wouldn't come all at once, but maybe it could begin here. Finally, Jacob whispered, "If I let you in, I need boundaries. I need to build my life without you trying to control it. I need to be Jacob. Not just your son, not just Daniel's mistake, not the town's gossip. Me." Michael's eyes filled with tears. He nodded slowly. "Then that's who I'll love you. No matter what." Jacob's chest tightened. Forgiveness wouldn't come all at once, but maybe it could begin here. At that moment, Jacob realized forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about deciding whether love was worth the risk of letting someone close again. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was running. Jacob had begun to let Michael back in, slowly. A coffee here, a phone call there, small steps, but steps nonetheless. For the first time in years, Jacob felt like maybe forgiveness was possible. The wounds weren't healed, but they weren't bleeding at they once had. Michael cherished every moment to him. Even a small piece of Jacob's life was better than nothing, but Daniel saw those moments, and they burned him. When word reached Daniel that Michael was visiting the city, he snapped. So Michael got to be the father again, after everything. After the truth had finally come out, Daniel's jealousy festered. In his mind, Jacob was his son, his blood, and no matter how late he'd been to the role, no matter how much he had failed before, he wasn't about to let Michael steal what was rightfully his. It happened one Saturday afternoon. Jacob was at a cafe with Michael when Daniel walked in. His presence was like a storm, loud, charged, impossible to ignore. He pulled up a chair, ignoring Jacob's stunned expression. "So this is how it is, you two, playing happy family again." Michael tensed, jaw tight. Daniel not here, but Daniel leaned forward, eyes locked on Jacob. "You think he can give you what I can't? He's not your father, Jacob. He never was. You're mine. You'll always be mine." The cafe fell silent. All eyes turned toward the table. Jacob's hands shook as rage boiled inside him. He slammed his fist on the table, his voice rising. "Enough. Both of you, do you hear me? I'm done being pulled like a rope in your tug of war." His chest heaved as he looked at them both, eyes burning. "You want to know who I belong to. No one. Not you, Michael. Not you, Daniel. I belong to myself. And if either of you can't accept that, then you don't belong in my life at all." The words stunned them both into silence. Michael's heart cracked, but he stayed quiet, knowing Jacob needed space. Daniel's face darkened, his pride wounded, his jealousy flaring. But even he couldn't speak. Jacob stood, chair scraping loudly, and walked out of the cafe. For the first time the brothers sat side by side, united only in the silence of what they had just lost. The fragile progress Jacob had made shattered under the weight of Daniel's jealousy, and now Jacob faced a choice more final than ever before. Could he truly build a future with either man in it, or was it time to cut them both out for good? After the cafe incident, Jacob went quiet. He stopped answering Michael's calls. He ignored Daniel's texts. He needed space, not the illusion of it, but the kind that forced him to stare at himself in the mirror and ask, "Who am I without them?" For weeks he walked the city streets alone, thinking. Every corner, every light post seemed to whisper the same question. Can I move forward with them in my life, or do I finally have to let go? One evening Michael showed up again, hesitant, humble. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Jacob, I don't want to fight anymore. I just want you to know, if you shut me out forever, I'll understand, but my door will always stay open. Always." Michael's eyes carried no demand, no claim, only love, raw and quiet. It was the kind of love that didn't beg to be recognized, but refused to die. Days later, Daniel confronted him too, though his tone was sharper, laced with bitterness. "You can't just erase me, Jacob. I'm your blood. That matters, whether you like it or not." Jacob looked at him, tired of the arrogance, tired of the excuses. "Blood matters, Daniel, but so does choice, and you never chose me, not until it was too late." The words hit Daniel like a slap. For once he had no comeback. That night Jacob sat alone in his apartment, staring at the skyline. The city hummed with life, but inside him the silence was deafening. He picked up a pen and began to write, not to Michael, not to Daniel, but to himself. "I am not defined by their war. I am not defined by their mistakes. Michael gave me love. Daniel gave me blood. But I choose what defines me, and I choose me." The next day Jacob called them both. His voice was steady but firm. "I'm not cutting either of you out completely, but I'm not letting you pull me apart anymore. If you want to be in my life, it will be as part of my world, not the other way around. I'm not your possession. I'm not your prize. I'm Jacob, and I belong to myself." For the first time in his life, Jacob's choice wasn't about loyalty, wasn't about blood, wasn't about who raised him. It was about him, and in that moment he finally became whole. Michael returned home to an empty house, but for the first time the silence didn't crush him. Jacob's words echoed in his mind. "I belong to myself." It hurt, yes. He had dreamed of hearing Jacob call him Dad again, of reclaiming the closeness they once shared. But he also knew he had to let Jacob define himself, even if that meant stepping back. So Michael chose to love quietly, through letters he sent every few months, through prayers whispered at night, through acceptance rather than possession. He had lost the battle for titles, but he hadn't lost his son's love, not completely. Daniel took it harder. He had built his identity on pride, on claiming Jacob as his own. But Jacob's decision had left him stripped bare. For weeks he lashed out, angry at Michael, angry at Sarah, angry at himself. But deep down he knew the truth. Jacob's words were right. Blood wasn't enough. And so Daniel faced the one thing he had always avoided: regret. He realized too late that fatherhood had never been about DNA. It had been about showing up day after day, something he had failed to do. The bitterness gave way to silence, and the silence to shame. For once, Daniel had nothing left to fight with except the hope that maybe one day Jacob would see him not as a rival, but as a man trying to change. Jacob, meanwhile, felt lighter than he ever had. The decision had cost him tears, sleepless nights, and years of turmoil. But in the end, he had found clarity. He no longer introduced himself as Michael's son or Daniel's son. He was simply Jacob. A man defined not by his father's love, nor his uncle's blood, but by his own choices. He built a new circle of friends. He nurtured a relationship that wasn't tainted by secrets. He found joy in ordinary things: laughter at a cafe, sunrise over the city skyline, quiet evenings spent in peace. And when people asked about his family, he answered carefully but truthfully, "I have two fathers, but the only one I truly belong to is myself. Michael lived with quiet pride, Daniel lived with regret, and Jacob lived with peace. The secret had once shattered a family, but in the end, Jacob's choice turned the wreckage into something stronger: the freedom to define family, not by blood, not by betrayal, but by his own terms." Years passed. The scandal that once consumed their small town faded into whispers, then into distant memory. New stories replaced the old, new gossip took root. But for those at the center, the wound never fully disappeared. Michael grew older with a quiet dignity. His hair turned gray, his hands stiff with work, but his heart softened with time. He never stopped writing to Jacob, never stopped reminding him that love, once given, never truly fades. Daniel, too, changed. The reckless charm that once defined him dulled with age. Regret left its mark, humbling him in ways pride never could. He stopped claiming Jacob as his own, stopped trying to win a battle he had already lost. For the first time in his life, Daniel chose silence over arrogance. And Jacob became a man his own way. He carried scars, yes, but he carried strength too. Looking back, Jacob understood something he couldn't see as a boy. Family wasn't about titles. It wasn't about DNA. It wasn't about who had the right to claim him. Family was about showing up, about sacrifice, about love that stayed even when the truth threatened to tear everything apart. And though betrayal had shaped his story, it did not define it. Still, the secret carried a legacy. Whenever Jacob looked in the mirror, he saw traces of both men: Michael's steady eyes, Daniel's smile, a reminder of war that once tore his life apart. But instead of pain, he began to feel gratitude, because without the betrayal, he might never have discovered the strength to stand alone. Without the lies, he might never have learned the truth about love, that it is chosen, not inherited. On the anniversary of his 18th birthday, the day everything had fallen apart, Jacob visited Michael. They sat together on the porch, watching the sun set. "Do you regret it?" Jacob asked softly. Michael's eyes filled with tears, but he smiled, not for a second. "Because no matter what the world says, you'll always be my son." Jacob's heart ached, but this time it wasn't from pain, it was from peace, because he finally understood. Secrets can destroy, betrayals can scar, but love in its purest form outlasts them all. The story began with a secret. It ended with a truth. A man who wasn't a father by blood, but was one by choice. A brother who was a father by blood, but never by action. And a boy who became a man by choosing himself. The haunting legacy of that secret wasn't tragedy. It was the lesson that family is not what we're given, it's what we create. This has been another chilling story from Murder Book 360. Secrets, betrayal, and broken bloodlines remind us that sometimes the darkest truths aren't found in crime scenes, they are hidden inside families. If this story gripped you, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next case we uncover. And remember, what you think you know about family might just be the very thing that deceives you. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and keep your eyes open.